Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I'm going to talk about conflict magical strategies, attack, shield, and peace, love, and reconciliation. So our featured talismans, and you can see the links, and I'm going to be talking about them further in the talk, will be Andromeda and Sirius. So magic and astrological magic can definitely play a role in conflict, but I just want to kind of, actually, it's a much bigger subject. I think that, um, there's a tendency for people to think that the magic doesn't really count. So I can do all sorts of curses or magical attack or something, and that doesn't really, it's not really real. To me, it's exactly the same as going over with a 2x4 and hitting someone over the head. So, and that might be necessary. Again, I'm going to delve into this as we go on further. But what I really want to say is that I don't think the magic is really any different from all the other strategies and tactics that you can use in a conflict situation. So I want to talk about just sort of conflict, approaches to it, dealing with it, and then how magical strategies and astrological magic can fit into that overall conflict and conflict resolution. So, really conflict is absolutely natural. Yes, why can't we all live in peace? Because it's just impossible. I mean, conflict is going to come about no matter what. Individuals are going to have differences. How the conflict is handled is really the key. This is why our society has courts. It's interesting. My other career as an attorney is entirely taken up with dispute resolution. And the focus that I have there, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more too, is focused on justice, getting a fair result, and helping things run smoothly. But that doesn't mean there's not conflict. I mean, it's just like, and it doesn't mean it shouldn't be any conflict. So since it's inevitable and natural, and maybe even appropriate in certain circumstances, the question is, again, how do we deal with it? And I think that the first and most important thing that needs to be done is to see the situation clearly. What I see repeatedly as a lawyer is situations, people only see it from their own perspective, and then they want things to go 100% their way. So, it's funny because I'll talk to, someone will call me up and ask for my advice as an attorney, for example, a tenant, because I do landlord-tenant law, and the tenant will spend half an hour complaining vociferously about the terrible landlord and how much they charge the deposit, and only after half an hour does it come out that, oh yeah, they got drunk and trashed the place. So that puts a slightly different complexion on things, obviously. So what I've learned is to listen, not necessarily have a set opinion from the beginning, and really not to pass judgment until I've heard from the other side or heard enough about what else is going on to have a more objective view. So, being truly objective is incredibly difficult for yourself, but you want to try to do it as much as possible. And, you may need to get some outside advice, particularly if you can get someone who's objective, not just giving you sympathy that, always agrees with you. That's useful, but in this circumstance, we're trying to get clarity about the situation. If you go into this, chances are you're probably a little bit in the wrong. There's probably something to be said from the other side's perspective. I mean, it may not be true, but you need to at least consider the possibility and also recognize that you're emotionally hanging on to that, to the conflict. You may have a lot of baggage, particularly in a family situation or something like that. But really, unless you have that objective view of the conflict and the roots of the conflict, then you're really not going to be able to choose a good strategy or be able to deal with it in any possible way. So, sort of things break down, sort of like the nutshell is sort of fight or flight. I really would say that's either actively engaged or disengaged from conflict. And we'll go into further, but that's what I would say the real choice is, that you can say you can disengage from it or you can actually active engage. So disengage, that's often a useful strategy. And there's a Zen proverb that says if two dogs fight over a bone, if one drops it, the other walks away. I mean, it might be that the situation, if you just stop fighting, that's a way of resolving the situation. There's actual flight, which is basically you get out of range, get out of contact, get away from the situation, get away from the person or people that you're having the conflict with. That's another potential strategy. Acquiescence, I mean, you might decide, oh, wait a second, this isn't worth fighting over. In any situation, what you're going to need to be able to do to deal with it in any kind of reasonable way is to draw boundaries, and to draw reasonable boundaries. So, you may decide, look, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not going to fight about it anymore. Or you can say, no, this is really personal. This person's expecting me to do something. It's too much in my face. Like I said, my parents are telling me how to run my life. I'm going to have to draw a boundary about that. That's not their business. Or if I'm trying to tell someone else how to run their life again, maybe I'm stepping over that boundary. So finding those boundaries and drawing them. I can tell you as a Sun Pisces, I have a heck of a time with boundaries. People are always boundary stomping me, and then it always causes me stress, and I have to assert those boundaries. It's always very difficult. But that's your key, to dealing with this. The next sort of strategy in the disengagement was what I call shielding. And so this is where your protective talismans can come in. What we might call the more less aggressive use of algol in particular. Algol is probably our most powerful, definitely our most powerful protection talisman, and you can kind of engage with it in a more shield way. So most of our protective talismans are in the shield realm. Algol can have a potential aggressiveness depending on how you engage with algol. So this is probably the most profound use of protection talismans is for shielding. So in a sense, I would call this a disengagement. You're sort of hunkering down. You're just trying to keep the negativity away from you, all that malefic spiritual forces or energy or whatever you're dealing with. And algol has this additional quality of throwing back whatever's thrown at you, which seems fair enough to me. I mean, whatever they have thrown at you, then it just gets thrown back at them. That seems fair enough. Some people think that's too much for them. So again, that's why we have a variety of different talismans. But that's what I would say is that the shield strategy comes in that sort of disengagement. You're not actively attacking it, but you're also not just putting up with it. You're actually taking a stand there in a really spiritual way or magical way. You're actually drawing a literal boundary there and not letting that negativity come across us. So that's, I think, definitely a useful strategy. I think it's a strategy for a lot of people that and it may be the only one you can take. So maybe there's nothing you can do but hunker down and try to keep that negativity and aggressive malefic attack away from you. So the other strategy, like I said, there's disengagement. The other strategy is engage actively. Now the typical approach for that is going to be attack. Shove back. And attack, naturally turns into escalation. There's a great quote from the movie Casino. The Joe Pesci character, Nicky Santoro, Eighth Rothstein, says about him. He says, no matter how big a guy might be, Nicky would take him on. You beat Nicky with fists, he comes back with a bat. You beat him with a knife, he comes back with a gun. And if you beat him with a gun, you better kill him because he'll keep coming back and back until one of you is dead. This is the natural progression of attack. There's escalation coming into it. It ends up taking a great deal of energy. And in fact, you're taking a chance you may lose. In fact, you eventually will losing the attack strategy because there's always somebody bigger, stronger, and eventually younger or crazier than you are. So this is a strategy that's very emotionally satisfying. You see it all the time out there. I mean, politically, in terms of, countries, how people deal with things. There's this idea that, you can be tough, and it also engages your anger. So there's a lot of emotion involved in it. There's also this subjectivity as far as the other side is evil incarnate. You're an innocent victim, so again, it's appropriate to do all sorts of horrible stuff to them because, they're terribly in the wrong against you. And this is where you get a good amount of magical attacks. And people are using it, again, like I said, there's a tendency to kind of not really take responsibility for magical attacks, to say like, oh, it's sort of a joke. Or, another problem with magical attacks is that you don't know if you're actually under attack or who's doing it. You can have this ridiculous situation where the other side is not doing anything at all and you're sure that they've attacked you. I had someone contact me, probably a year ago, and they're like, oh, I thought you put a curse on me and you were attacking me, and then it turned out you weren't. And this is the first time they contacted me, and I didn't even know this person. And I definitely was not wasting my time doing magical attacks. I don't do magical attacks. But they had somehow gotten themselves in this idea that I was doing all this stuff to them. So really messed up, twisted situation. And I think that's, attacks are bad enough. But then the magical stuff put into it, it's even worse because you have no idea if it's actually really happening or who's the cause of it or what, and then who's responsible or who to attack back. So, in my mind, not a good idea 90% of the time. I wouldn't entirely rule it out. Like I said, I am very knowledgeable. I know how to do a powerful magical attack. So it hasn't been necessary in my life so far. And this is not to say that attack is never warranted. And what's kind of interesting about this is just like my other career as a lawyer. Essentially, I'm a civil prosecutor, or what they call a private attorney general. I've been in a lot of cases in the landlord tenant area, in particular suing landlords. But I think it's important to really understand though that the law is not about attacks. Suing somebody is not a threat. Okay, this is a dispute resolution mechanism. Okay, everything's tamped down, everything's supervised. It certainly does seem like an attack to the defendant, though. I mean, they're going to feel like they're under attack. But in my situation as an attorney, it's really the only way to get their attention. I mean, these situations I'm not in because I'm trying to make money, but because I'm trying to make a change in people's behavior. And the landlords are in a powerful position. Why should they pay attention? If I contact them and say I have some suggestions, they're just going to blow me off. So the lawsuit is really the only way to kind of, give them a bit of a poke there. The only really way to stop them from illegal action. The thing about it is, though, is again, you can't attack them into submission. You can't force them to went through attacks. So essentially like I said, the lawsuit's sort of an attention getter, and then you have to, at some point, make a switch to negotiation and discussion. It's sort of like the IRA from the bombing, to the peace process. That's very tricky to do. People get upset, they're angry, they feel like they're under attack, and then you're trying to go ahead and have this negotiation with them. So that's something it's hard to do. What I would say about it is that I've had a numbers of parties that I've sued have turned around and hired me as their attorney. And so the reality was it's actually best help for tenants as a landlord attorney where I'm giving advice to the landlord. So this is what I would say about the attack stuff is that, again, if you're going to do that, then it really cannot come out of an emotional state. It can't come out of fear or paranoia, and it really needs to be limited, and there needs to be an exit strategy in terms of doing it. So the situations where it's going to work effectively, I think, are fairly limited. Again, I wouldn't rule it out entirely, but it's something that I think people don't think about objectively, don't adopt strategically, and are basically doing it emotionally. So the next way of active engagement is what I would call active engagement for peace, love, and reconciliation. So it's like a nonviolent sort of thing. And this is one of the things like, Martin Luther King would always emphasize that nonviolence is not passive, it's active. So this is, not a situation of just being a doormat. I think the modern idea of a saint is somebody who just lets people walk all over you, has no boundaries, and gets abused. You're really not helping somebody by letting them assault you. That's not in your interest. It's not in their interest. So what the peace, love, and reconciliation has the real virtue, though, of going to the root of the conflict. If you can deal with that, rather than just shielding yourself and hiding, rather than running away, rather than attacking the person, you actually have an opportunity to get to the root of the problem, pull it out completely, eliminate it as a problem, and maybe even potentially have a better relationship. And this is going to be particularly important if you're dealing with your friends or family. I mean, it's really difficult, but also really important to do. So like I said, not always possible, not always appropriate. I mean, this is someone saying, makeup or whatever. It just may not be doable, and it may not, the other person's may not be willing to do that. But you don't want to say, not do it just because of your feelings. It's a question of practicality if you're looking objectively at the situation. But I know from my own experience that is even if you want it really badly, and if you try really hard, it may not work. I have been estranged from my family, since I was a teenager. I repeatedly tried to reconcile with them. Even on both my parents, even on their deathbed, I had, apologized and said I was sorry about all the things that I'd done, and I got no response back from them. But, I was glad I at least tried. But that was a situation that was just the problems were too deep rooted. Reconciliation wasn't able to take effect. So not a panacea, not 100%, and not always a strategy that you have to use in every circumstance, but definitely something you want to think about as a possibility. So again, this is an area where magic can really be helpful. Not necessarily all by itself. Again, you want to be using it in an overall strategy. Like I said, you want to be understanding the situation as clearly as possible, as objective as possible with it. Certainly for this, you're going to require some humility, compromise, and effort on both sides. And But definitely there are very effective magical means for peace, love, and reconciliation, particularly astrological talismans. And so the two talismans I want to feature for this are Andromeda and Sirius. So Andromeda is a constellation, and Albertus Magnus in his De Mineralibus says that this image brings about lasting love between man and wife, said to reconcile even those who've been adulterous. So really, this is a talisman, a very, very strong love talisman, but also very much of a reconciliation talisman, bringing back people together that have had problems and helping them reconcile. And then there's a fixed star, Sirius. Agrippa says in his 3 books of occult philosophy, it says it bestoweth honor and goodwill, the favor of men and aerial spirits. That's all nice. It says, but give us the power to pacify and reconcile kings, princes, and other men. And then Hermes in the 15th star says it brings peace and concord between kings and potentates and between husbands and wives. So again, this is also a very, very powerful peace and reconciliation talisman. So again, I would recommend those highly, something to try. If you're in a situation where you're trying to get reconciliation, something to think about. Also something to think about in general, if you have conflict with somebody, is peace and reconciliation a possibility? Is it something you want to try? You know, and again, hard to do in some circumstances, but the most effective in the long run, really, of anything. More than stomping your enemy into the ground. Doesn't work very often. And if you just have to look at sort of the, you know, the ongoing political conflicts that we have, you know, and the attack and attack back and attack back and attack back and anger and emotion, not working long term. Again, maybe the peace and reconciliation won't work either on the short term, but it's certainly worth thinking about, worth trying. So I want to talk a little bit about an additional booster, magical booster for peace and reconciliation that you can use with either Sirius or Andromeda. And so this comes from hoodoo, which is Southern folk magic, and it is what's called honey jar magic. And you could use it either with, I said, with Andromeda or Sirius. So I've got a link in there to Lucky Mojo, to the honey jar site, to the page on their website. Not everyone's wild about Lucky Mojo. I mean, I certainly, this is what I've used when I took the course. I use it successfully. If you don't like them, that's fine. I mean, it's up to you. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it. This is not something that they own. But again, I find it very effective from my personal experience, and that's why, and I got it from this source, so that's why I have mentioned that. Again, not the only source, not the only way to go with it if you have a different preference. But basically what you're doing is doing a hoodoo, what's called a petition paper, which is sort of like a talisman. And the instructions that they have, you write the name of the person you're trying to influence 3 times, then turn it, and then cross it with your name 3 times, and then write your goal around the names in circles, again, all without lifting your pen. And then what I would be doing as well would be adding either the Sirius sigil or the name Sirius or Andromeda, and the name Andromeda. And then put the paper, once you put that on the petition paper, then you put it in a jar of sugar, you know, a glass jar with a lid on it. Put the piece of paper and the sugar to sweeten it up. And so, again, this is not coercive. If you're desirous for peace and reconciliation, you're not overbearing their will or something like that. You're just trying to get them to be more positive towards you, which I think is a very positive goal, and you know, not something that people need to be freaked out about. Again, if you don't like hoodoo magic, and that's, you know, you're just down on it altogether, then you wouldn't do it. But I haven't found it. I didn't found this to be problematic in any way. Now, what you could also do is to go ahead and essentially make the petition paper as a talisman. So you'd make it at an appropriate time for Sirius and Andromeda, if you know how to do that. It would be Sirius or Andromeda rising or culminating, and the moon applying to conjoin sextile or trine Sirius or Andromeda. Essentially, you're converting it to a talisman, and then kind of synthesizing it. If you're interested in, you know, on the fixed star stuff, you can check out my fixed star, sign and constellation magic books, and Quindecim Stellus. These are 2 books, Renaissance astrology books on fixed stars. Again, astrological magic course obviously would be useful for this, which is a link to that, and also my astrology for root workers course if you're interested in how this combination of astrology and root work. They would have used, you know, moon phase, possibly planetary hours, not fixed stars because that's a little bit exotic, but there's no reason why it wouldn't. The combination of root work and astrology works very well, and there's already been integrated into it. So you would want to regularly consecrate it. I mean, ideally every day with Sirius and Andromeda rising or culminating. That's a lot of work. It keeps changing every day. I've been doing some other fixed stars Oh boy, it really is hard because you got to change it every day. You got to watch it, and it moves throughout the day. What I would say is that that's maybe overkill, and you don't want to get freaked out if you can't do it every day or miss it because you have to be at work or something like that. But regular consecration is helpful. I also want to share that I did this successfully using Sirius. I actually consecrated every day that wasn't necessarily at the Sirius time, and it took a year. This is a very dangerous situation for me. The other side was very powerful, coming after me. It had some very serious repercussions for me. But after a year of the consecration, plus, I took reasonable objective results too. I dealt with the situation and did the best I could to reconcile with them and to make everything, so that they were happy. And I got a good result out of it. So I've considered that to be a very successful use of the peace and reconciliation magic. The circumstances were appropriate, and I got a very good result out of it by integrating the magic into my overall strategy. So I think this is, like I said, very interesting topic, lots of different possibilities. The key is to see the situation clearly, think about all the different possibilities that you have, try to step away from just a pure emotional response as much as possible, and then, I don't say overall that there's one way you got to go. You want to look at the circumstances. There's a time, as they say, Ecclesiastes, it's a time for every purpose under heaven. My tendency is much more to the shield possibility, like I said, with the protective talismans, or to peace and reconciliation if I can. I wouldn't entirely rule out attack, but again, that's something that I think that it's rare that objectively that's going to be the best thing. If it is, it needs to have an exit strategy. It needs to have a limited use of it. I need a way out, as opposed to, okay, I'll hit them with everything I've got, and then they come back with you even stronger. That's what you got to watch out for. So interesting to think about. There's rampant stuff going on. So something that you may end up being dragged into unwillingly, if it comes up. Ideally, though, you can get it to work out. But particularly in a situation where you're dealing with friends and family, or a relationship that you'd like to salvage, it's not going the way you want. Obviously, the peace and reconciliation is something you're going to think about, and something to try. So check out the links. If this is a situation that's going on with your aunt right now, you might want to get a Sirius and Andromeda talisman and try that. The honey jar, this sugar jar, additional boost to it to bring some extra power. And hopefully you can get the resolution that you want to your situation. So I hope you find that interesting. I certainly had an interesting time thinking about it, and I look forward to talking about these topics more in the future.